Welcome to Happy Maths Hour, Education for Life in the 21st Century, Part 2. Welcome from myself, Caroline from Bubbly Maths, and Toni, go ahead.
Hello. Yes, we're just going to chat about teaching this evening, and it's not really only for teachers. It's just for anybody who's interested in education, and particularly as well as teachers, parents who might be working a bit with their children at home.
Yeah, everyone's a teacher, including the children.
Yes.
Okay, the slide shows up.
Oh, so do you like the heart? Caroline found this, and isn't it charming? I just I had to put that on because it was Valentine's Day.
And that is a mathematical function, by the way.
It's a graph.
A graph,
Well,
yeah.
yes,
Is it not a function? Here we go again.
oh yes, a big graph of a function. Yes,
Mm.
indeed. And actually, it's it's sorry, that's what I wanted to show. Yes, and it's on a card, and the card which we took the picture from, and the card has a table of values from which the function is calculated. Okay, so Mandela said, "There's no passion to be found playing small in settling for a life that's less than the one you're capable of living." So we're aiming high, and that's a slogan I use a lot. But Caroline's been doing a lot of supply teaching and finding that our teenagers in the UK, many of them are certainly not aiming for a life that they could live if they were better educated, because they're more or less rejecting education now, aren't they, Caroline?
Definitely.
So sad.
It is very, it is heartbreaking.
Yes. So let's see, why is that happening? Why? I think it's something to do with the culture in the UK, and not with the immigrant culture, but with those of us who are, the originals. Okay, so what we would like to see is the growth mindset. And I think babies have that naturally. They're born with it. They want to walk and talk. And I love the picture of that toddler who's just fallen forward. He's already learnt to put his hands out when he falls so he doesn't fall on his face. But he's still not got very good balance. He's still a bit wobbly, but he's determined to learn to walk and succeed. And he keeps trying. It's quite hard work. And he knows what he wants to do. He wants to walk like all those other big people around him. And he's quite confident. He knows he can walk. Well, he knows he will learn one day.
Well,
And
yeah, it's not. They're not really thinking about it, are they? They're just determined
no,
to do it. It's not like I
just
will do
natural.
this.
No, it's just
Yeah,
natural. They don't. It's not expressed in those words, but he's feeling it anyway, and he has got a positive attitude to mistakes. When he falls over, he doesn't think, "Oh, I can't do this," and stop trying, does he?
no.
So, where do these negative attitudes come from?
A baby knows that they want to walk. Someone in high school knows that they don't want to learn maths.
Sad. It's really sad. Um, I, I, I think we want to try and change that, because even if they are quite happy with a job that doesn't require much of an education, maybe it won't be a very secure job. Maybe they just want to be a refuse collector or something like their dad. But maybe that will be automated before long, and
Well,
then they'll be out of a job. But anyway, it's not just the job. There's so much to enjoy in life. It's not just mathematics either. There's so much to enjoy in life if you're just that bit better informed and prepared for it. So I love that picture of the old man and the baby. And I think often it's the grandparents that are left to look after the little ones, and the mums and dads are so busy. And but it's not just learning to walk that little ones, babies, are so determined about. It's also learning to talk, isn't it? And be able to communicate, to be able to get what they want because they ask for it.
So and the thing is, it's that determination, it's that absolute determination that they know what they want and they will get it. And again, going back to high school, they know what they want, and that is to not engage with class, and they get it because they're determined to not do it. So you've got to overcome that hump before you can engage them.
Yes, but I did say that it's not true of the immigrant population by and large in even, you know, second and third generation immigrants in our country, in the UK. And so I think a lot of it is coming from the home. If the parents have always encouraged them to think education is important and to try at school to do their best, then they will do that and not have the attitudes that we were talking about. So the big question is, in green on the screen, how do we encourage, nurture and manage children's natural curiosity and motivation to learn, not when they're tiny tots, but as they're growing up? You know, and the teachers alone can't do that. It has to come from both the home and the school. Of course, the teachers can kill it too, but by not teaching very well. So there's a green question mark. I just learned very recently that in Spain they put a question mark at the beginning of the question as well as at the end. And I wanted to emphasize that. So I went a bit Spanish, although the question's written in English. Okay, so let's move on. So asking questions, this is what little ones do. Why? On what? Where? How? When? Who? You know, the 5 W's and also how. And yes, it's important to answer those questions and encourage more questions. Keep them coming. That's what is so healthy. And I know it's hard when parents are busy and you know, they've got so much to do to answer those questions. They maybe don't know the answers, and ideally they'd say, well, let's find out and find out with the child. Oh, well, that's where maybe the oldies who've got more time, the retired oldies can help a bit. But questions are so important when they come from children, and we should try and encourage it.
Yeah, so encourage it, not quell it, not squash that enthusiasm, because that enthusiasm squashed could end up with that person who doesn't want to go to school.
And I have a horrible feeling that sometimes children go to school full of excitement about the world around them and eager to learn and find out. They wouldn't put it in those terms, but that's just how they feel. And when they get to school, they have to sit quiet and listen. And you know, and that just kills all that natural curiosity. So Bruner was an interesting man. He only died very recently in 2016, at the ripe old age of 101. But in the middle of the last century, he came up with some theories that really revolutionized teaching. And it was just in this early 60s. It was just, before that, but these big ideas were really just beginning to take hold. And he'd developed these ideas, and people were learning about them in the 60s when I started teaching. And so Jerome Bruner's theory of development is that we learn best when we go from the concrete to the abstract in a 3-step process. So the first is play, really, and it's hands-on. It's, as you see, the young kids in the playing in the sand, they're building a pyramid. So it's very hands-on. It's something concrete, which means you've got something in your hands that's solid, and you can manipulate it. And then the second stage is learning with images. And there you see in the picture, it could be somebody at home or at school, but there's a grown-up behind, drawing well, it's just a triangle, but it looks like a triangle, but drawing it.
Drawing an image of the pyramid, yeah.
Yes.
Or a representation of the pyramid, which could just be one of its faces, the triangle.
Exactly. And finally, the students transformed what they have learned into something more abstract. Those are abstract ideas, and express them, communicate those ideas with language. And throughout the experience, they constantly revisit things they've learned before. And the teachers need to provide carefully structured guidance along the way, and it seems to work. So that's Bruner's theory of development.
Toni, if we can just stick with that idea, if you can just go back 1 second, well, you've got a similar image here, and that is that it's not just young learners, intermediate learners, and high-level learners that we're talking about here. We're talking about any idea that you work from scratch, or any realization or any invention. You start with something very concrete, then you make a plan, and then you go for the high level of designing it to the nth, to very small details. And the same with your Alan. Tony's husband is a mathematician, and he writes lots of papers, and he is constantly researching and discovering new things. And he starts, when he has a new idea, he starts with something concrete, so that he then can look at it and visualize it and see, actually, is my theory correct? And then he proceeds perhaps to draw it, and then he proceeds to write about it in mathematical terms.
Yes,
including images.
You're absolutely right. He's certainly, he doesn't necessarily play with building bricks like the baby there, but he
well, he would if it was relevant.
He probably would. He certainly thinks about it in a very sort of down-to-earth way, let's say, and then he talks about it informally, and finally he produces something that's a written and formal account of what he's just discovered. But let's talk about the spiral, because this is something Caroline and I have used a lot and talked about a lot, this learning spiral for lifelong learning, not just while we're in school. And this is the idea that students revisit the same topic at regular intervals. And the new learning builds on previous learning, and the complexity of the topic increases with each revisit. Now, this is something a little bit different from what we were just seeing from the concrete to the abstract in 3 stages. This is a spiral of learning where the ideas, even now I come back to ideas that I thought I knew about, and I learn a little bit more, and I learn, probe a little bit more deeply. So it goes on for your whole life. That's the learning spiral. Now, back to the development, and the 3 words that Bruno used were inactive, which means acting. It means experience something in a concrete way,
in an active way.
In an active way. Iconic means you see it in a symbol, and symbolic means you write it, you speak it, or you write it in a formal way. And now what we see here is the children eating the cake. All right, let's suppose there are 4 people in the family. It seems as if the idea is the cake is cut into 4 equal parts, so everybody gets an exactly fair share. Okay, and the active bit is the children eating the cake in the beginning. And then the mother, it seems, has drawn a picture of how you might divide that cake into 4. You see? Okay, into 4. And finally, probably sometime later, the girl there is doing some schoolwork probably, and it's all about a quarter and percentages. So she's written it as 25%. Can you see? And that is your abstract or symbolic representation of the, and she's thinking of the picture the mother showed them, or maybe it was a teacher, of cutting the cake into 4.
She's visualizing it. And that's the power of visualization. That's what I talk about when you, as a young learner, you manipulate geometric shapes and triangles and anything physical to represent the maths that you're learning. Later on, you use that to help you visualize it. It gives you the ability to visualize because you've got literally mental images to turn to, mental representations to turn to.
And this has so much to say to parents at home. So, it's not a great idea to give your children a screen when they're very young. Much better give them bricks to play with and water to play with. The water doesn't cost anything, and plastic cups and things of different sizes so they can pour water about. Especially if we can do that in the garden and the weather's nice and they can really get wet and enjoy playing with water. And of course, as you saw in an earlier slide, playing with sand. I mean, these things are very, very important. And of course, another thing that children like to do is role playing. I mean, when my children were very small, a very long time ago, we had a bag of old clothes that they dressed up in. And they pretended to be, well, all sorts of things they pretended to be. And, all this is part of a natural learning process. And it's, they had toy tea sets and practiced serving meals. And then, of course, cookery at home is a good way to learn, isn't it? So there are so many ways in which you can learn at home without it taking a lot of the parents' time.
And it's never too late as well. That's one of the things that I find working with teenage learners who just missed a whole tranche of their learning, that you go back to the inactive and the iconic versions, and they can then quickly make the leap to symbolic. But if they've got misconceptions, without showing them the physical representation of it, it's those misconceptions, it's really hard to shift them. But if you can show them the physical representation of it, then it's like, oh, okay, so what I'm thinking doesn't make sense. And they realize it for themselves. So it's never too late. Don't just stick with pencil and equations when they're missing like fractions and they're missing basic number sense. It's never too late.
And of course, they may be too old really to play with water and sand, but why not cooking at any age, really? And there's so much to learn from cooking, and you get a recipe, and you're having a party and you want to make it for more people, or it's a recipe for more people and you want to make it for a small number, or it depends on the size of your cake tin, what size you're going to make the cake. So
not my experience. Teenagers are perfectly happy to get a bunch of different size containers and fill them with water and find out how much what the volume is of each of those containers. Perfectly happy to do that. Absolutely. I mean, it's a really nice lesson.
That's absolutely true, and it's one of the lessons we share with teachers and parents alike, isn't it? But no, I was really meaning, sort of, I can imagine the sand pit we had in the garden for our children.
Yeah,
when they were
you're not get them in the sand pit. Yeah, that would be harder. Yeah,
and I'm not sure they'd pour water in the bath as they did when they were toddlers.
It's not natural exploration, but it's more of a project. But it's absolutely using the inactive.
But I do think cooking's a good idea. So the other thing on this slide, which we haven't talked about, what do you think of constructivism, Caroline?
Oh my goodness. So constructivism being the 3 stages.
No, it's it is sort of. It's written on the slide there that learners
I'm reading it.
Construct their own knowledge and do this by organizing and categorizing information using some sort of coding system. That's what's happening in the brain. This is Bruner's Constructivism, which, as I said, it was just coming out and becoming popular in primary in particular, not so much in secondary when I started teaching. But it is now. It's very well established in the Western world. Bruner believed that the most effective way to learn is by guided discovery rather than being told by the teacher. And it's that line, rather than being told by the teacher, that says a lot.
Yeah, the guided discovery. Yeah, that's constructivism. Sorry, I didn't click that. Guided discovery, absolutely. It's just powerful at all ages. It's so powerful when you've got a teeny weeny little toddler who's just doing random things and you just guide them a little bit. Once they've established within the game, what if this and what if that, or just put things in front of them and see what they do with them, or back to all the way up to people. School leaving, that is still a powerful way for them to learn, for them literally to figure it out for themselves with the right guidance.
Absolutely. And you're right, Caroline. I mean, constructivism is related to these 3 stages, because you see, when he talks about this coding system, it's eventually they learn to be able to talk about it using language, logical thinking and language, and to express it in symbolic form if it's that sort of idea. So that's the coding system, but it takes a while to get to that stage, and the visualization is important, which is on the way, and the practical activity through which they began to learn, playing around with the idea, is the first stage. So yes, that's part of the development. And Caroline, there's so many different ways of describing this. What Bruner called it in 1961 when he wrote about it and the idea was spreading, was constructivism. Now, people have added their own variations and to this basic idea, and it's called activity-based learning, inquiry-based learning, discovery learning, guided reinvention. And if you're sort of very pedantic about it, you might distinguish between them with slight variations, but they're all essentially the same thing. Rather than the teacher standing at the front of the class at the beginning of the lesson and giving an explanation and showing learners how to do this particular process on the board, and then giving them practice, and half the learners are not listening, she does something very different. She gives them an activity and encourages them to learn by themselves. So here, I think we've seen that slide. Here we go. This is very interesting. In the 1980s, the Singapore government decided to stop importing foreign textbooks and instead build the world's best curriculum from scratch. They followed Bruner's guidelines and in fact ended up on their curriculum studying fewer concepts in greater detail. Now, what's extremely interesting is that nowadays, not only do they top the world ranking in school maths and science, but in lots of places around the world, people are adopting the Singapore methodology. And they call it Singapore math or maths, okay, but actually it all comes from Bruner. Now, something that's very interesting, these world rankings in these international assessments, TIMSS and PISA, international comparisons, by the late 90s, Singapore learners were at the top of the ranking. They were really doing well, you know, in the top, usually in the top 5 in the world countries. And that was really remarkable with their curriculum, you know. But they didn't do very well in problem solving. And I got a bit involved there. I got invited to Singapore, and I met with government and teacher trainers and went into some schools, and it was very interesting, you know. And then I organized, this was when I was as director of Enrich, and I organized a conference in Cambridge in the year 2000. And we had quite a lot of government officials from Singapore and some teachers who came to this conference because it was about problem solving, and they wanted to learn more about problem solving and how to do it effectively in their schools. It was really very, very interesting. And I can remember the thing that, this is 22 years ago, the thing that really surprised me at the time was how much technology they had in their classrooms. You know, a lot compared to what we had in Britain, and I'm sure that's still the case. Anyway, now they have got top of the world in problem solving as well. So it didn't take them long to address that issue. You know, they were doing extremely well in every other aspect, and they are now they top the world ranking. They're in the top 5 usually, or top 10 anyway, in not just both maths but also in science. And it's all based on this methodology that came originally from Bruner, where you start with the concrete and then you have the image, the pictorial, then something to visualize, and finally the abstract. And the little picture there is a human brain, that's ideas in the brain as opposed to building blocks or something you play with at the beginning. So that's Singapore math. Interesting, isn't it? Yes. So here's an example, right? So you've got suites or stars or canters, and you've got 10 of one sort and 5 of another. Concrete, something solid and concrete. And the question is, how many have you got altogether? Well, you can start to draw a picture where that you've got a red bar showing 15 and a yellow bar for 10 and a blue bar for 5. And so you can see that the 10 and the 5 make 15. There's your picture. And then the question at the top is 10 add 5. What's that? You know, put 10 and 5 together, how many? With a question mark. And then you've got the abstract idea that 10 plus 5 equals 15 is written in the symbols on the right. So that there is, yes, so that's Singapore maths. Oh, what I should have said when I showed you these slides, I should have said so earlier. I borrowed the pictures, I'm sure they won't mind, from a website, and there is a YouTube as well, called Sprouts, and I think Caroline might Google it and put it on the list of links for this. So
can I have more info? Yes, I'll do that, but I need a bit more information. Just Sprouts? Can you remember anything else about it?
Sprouts, like Brussels sprouts, but not with the Brussels.
Well, let's see if.
Well, actually, if you just Googled Bruner and scaffolding together, you would get it, or Bruner and constructivism, I think you would get it.
Okay. I'll add Bruner to it. Thank you.
But thank you, Sprouts, because this I thought was really a very good, simple analysis of these very important teaching theories on which all the modern teaching is actually based, even though other people may have stolen it in the sense that they're not putting Bruner's name to it. So what about scaffolding? Well, here we go. This was what Bruner introduced the word scaffolding. And the idea is that teachers structure activities based on the students' existing knowledge and in a way that helps them to reach the desired learning outcome. And the teacher introduces the activity, then notice the teacher steps back and lets the student have a go. So it only introduces the activity, saying as little as possible, doesn't do it to show them, doesn't explain it to them. The teacher steps back and lets the students have a go and offers support and feedback when needed. And the support often takes the form of key questions. Instead of explaining, the teacher asks a question designed to help the learner find the answer and explanation for themselves. So the teacher's got the explanation in their mind, but they ask a question which guides the learner to think along the right lines and to reach out and to work towards an understanding. So that's scaffolding. Now, I love this picture. You can see these children are, and sort of because of the light on it, it makes it particularly appealing. There are more children in the background, but those three in the front are absolutely absorbed in what they're doing, and there's two there are doing it together. The little girl with the braids is busy writing. So brain research has proved that we can all learn to a high level of attainment if we're determined to succeed and work hard. Now, school mathematics is not beyond any child unless they are physically disabled. Really, I don't mean physically, I mean really, really seriously disabled. All normal children can learn school maths. It's not too difficult. So that's what I mean by the high level of attainment. I don't say they're going to be able to, get the top first in the best university. That's maybe something to strive for, but it's maybe have to be satisfied with a little less than that. As far as school maths is concerned, it is accessible and achievable by everyone, except that they can't leave it too late. They need to be working steadily throughout all those about 12 years in school and to be taught well. And most importantly, they have to have this motivation and work hard. So our brains are highly adaptable, and interestingly, they develop best when we face difficulties and make mistakes and persevere. Now, this adaptability of our brains is something that it's only been understood with recent research in the last 20 years. There's a case well known, but, well, perhaps by some, but anyway, there are people involved in the research, that early in the noughties, about 20 years ago, there was a child who had cancer in the brain, and it was so severe that she was 5 years old, and the doctors said, unless we remove it, which effectively meant removing half the brain, she will die. We can't say whether there will be a positive outcome, but to save her life, that's the only way. And so they actually removed half her brain. Age 5, she was obviously walking, talking, communicating, able to do all the sorts of things that 5-year-olds normally do. Now, of course, it took a long time, but what happened was that the one side of her brain that was left took over the functionality of this side of her brain that she'd lost. And by the time she was 8 years old, she was like a normal 8-year-old who could do everything that a normal 8, except she was slightly stiff on one side, apparently. She could do everything that a normal 8-year-old could do. Now, isn't that amazing? But with half a brain. And the side of her brain that was left was adaptable, they call it plasticity, and had taken over those functions that would normally be done by the half of the brain that was missing. Now, I think that is amazing. And what it has led to is a lot more research by doctors, educational psychologists, and in educationists as well, and people involved in teacher training, to try to see what the implications are for that to school. The implications are, of course, that we should not have low expectations of our young people. We must encourage each learner to want to do better, and we must change how we judge what our learners are capable of. In other words, we shouldn't ever say, I would, let them say, or let their parents say, and them hear, I was never any good at maths. I could never do maths. Because that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And to any parents who are listening, and even if you are a teacher, you're probably a parent as well, and many of you know this, but parents should never, ever say, even if it's what they feel, that they were never any good at maths. Because that means that for the children, it's all right not to be good at maths. It means you can't do it, so it means you don't really even try. It's really sad. And because I'm a maths teacher, when I socially meet people, and they ask you, what do you do? Well, I teach. What do you teach? I teach maths. Then you often say, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. I'm very old, so I've lived a long time. I've lost count of the number of people, grown-up people, who are very successful in life. They may be doctors, or they may be scholars of some sort or other, or teachers of other subjects, or, lawyers even, people who are really successful businessmen, people who are good at what they do, who say they were never any good at maths at school, and as if they're, almost proud of it. You don't hear people say, I was about some other subjects, I was never any good at that, and be proud of it. It's sad, isn't it, Caroline?
It's that what is missing is the whole concept of whatever it is, I can learn it, I can do it. And the especially, I think it exists in the States as well, and I've seen it in Spain as well, is the whole I can't do maths. Only certain people can do maths. And one of the really upsetting things about people that feel they can't do maths is that being good at maths is equated with being clever. So people that, not everybody, of course, but there are many, many young people and adults who feel that they are lacking in intelligence because they had a bad experience with maths, which left them believing they couldn't do it. Therefore, they were stupid. And it undermines people's self-confidence massively and takes away their willingness to learn maths.
But it's all that and more, isn't it? It's a lot of it's about the emotions. And, there's this maths anxiety, or actually, freezing when you presented with a maths problem and feeling that you can't do it. So the learning environment and the sort of emotions about it are so important. And it applies to any learning, really, but it certainly applies to maths.
I mean, I can't answer maths questions on the spot, but I have the confidence to know that it's okay. Give me a piece of paper, give me a pen, and just give me a moment, and I can do it. And it's that, I think that's part of the problem as well. That's part of the cause, is that people who really need that moment to think and actually process and understand what's being asked of them, being expected to give an instant answer and feeling if they can't give an instant answer, they're stupid.
Yes, and and then there's the question of speed. Actually being able to do something quickly isn't necessarily a sign of you're good at it. It can be the person who's slower is actually somebody who thinks more deeply and is determined to understand everything, rather than somebody who's following it through because they remember how to do it. I think speed is important, but I'm quite ambivalent about competition too. I know competition stimulates some people, but for the people who, let's now talk about in a classroom, for those who actually benefit from the competition, there are quite a lot who don't benefit at all because they came last, So
yeah, I'm not going to bother. I always come last. What's the point?
Yes.
Yeah, and it feels bad, so I don't want to do it.
So Caroline and I introduce a lot of games and puzzles, don't we, Caroline? But with very much the idea that you can take a long time, okay? If it's a puzzle, but you've got to believe you can solve it, you work at it. A game, well, in certain circumstances, you might have a time limit on each move, but basically you shouldn't feel under pressure, and it's not highly competitive,
and everyone can succeed.
Yes,
at some part of the game.
Yes. So, but I understand with the Olympics and leagues and various, whether it's sport or whether it's the mathematical Olympiad competitions or whatever it is. Yes, I know some will thrive on competition, but it's often a boy-girl thing. Quite often it's the boys who like the competition and the girls who, don't really. But maybe I shouldn't say that because these days it's not maybe politically correct.
Well, it also might be feeding the whole I was rubbish at maths when I was a kid, and it's like, well, girls aren't competitive. Maybe we're feeding that by saying it. That's a thought. It's so much to think about these days. So many new concepts coming in that we've got to process and take seriously.
But you see, my take on it with Enrich and with AIMSEC and everything is very much, something's worth doing, it's worth doing for its own sake. You want to do as well as you possibly can, not to beat other people, but to do better than you did last time, to do better than your personal best.
Yeah, beat your personal best.
Yeah.
Or even if you don't beat it, you will always be striving to improve.
Yes. So to do well, teachers and learners must believe in themselves, and they must think, yes, I can. Even if I can't do it now, I'll work hard until I can do it. So I found these two images. There's a second one coming up in a minute. And this is very interesting because it's come out of some joint work between neurologists, neuroscientists, medical people, and educationists, and studying the brain and human brain and the way it works. And of course, computer scientists are interested in this too. So it's all part of AI as well, artificial intelligence. So if you look around that picture, you've got the working memory, the executive control up in the frontal lobe there. And that's a bit like the random access memory in a computer, isn't it, Caroline?
It's the one that basically you erase when you go to sleep or you switch off.
Yes, it's short term. It's short term, yes.
Blink and it's gone, in my case.
And then just slightly below that, there's this area which is attention control and salience detection. How salience means how relevant is that? What do I need to know? What do I need to use to solve this problem? And that's the area of brain which is in action there. And then in the center there, well, not quite the center, below the center there's this episodic and semantic memory systems.
The caterpillar.
Yes, that looks like it in that illustration, doesn't it? And that's the area of the brain which is working on sequencing and the memory, drawing from the long-term memory, making those connections to what do I know, and what can I remember that I can make use of here.
That's relevant, yeah.
And then up at the top, with a little green area in our diagram, it's processing quantity information in visual spatial formats. Well, we've just been talking about visualization, and that's the area that's responsible for processing visual images, and then the orange area there is for the area which is involved in processing number information as well as symbols. Now, of course, all these have to be connected. They have to work together, and it's setting up those connections that's the learning that happens in the learning process for any particular learning that's taking place. So it's described there as a brain network, and for mental arithmetic, let's say, for adding 5 and 8, and what do you get? So for any learning process anyway, you've got this network, and these are neurons that are fired to send impulses and messages to other parts of the brain, and to form that link which makes sense, brings together everything that's needed. Just like in a computer where you've got a network, it's modeling. I'm sorry, the computer is mimicking the human brain, and it's automated in such a way that it can do some things better than the human brain, but there's an awful lot that the human brain can do that the computer can't do. Thank goodness. But earlier on we talked about emotions. I like this diagram, and it's very interesting to look at them both together, really, isn't it? So
yeah, it is. It's a good making connections again.
Yes, and so the learner's emotional and social experience is going to affect the learning. And it's in that same area as the working memory, or near, the areas are near to each other. So if you feel, well, I can't do it, or I'm afraid of it, and I'm not going to try, then it's not going to happen, is it? And the optimal learning environments, which is the sort of heading for this this diagram, is up to the parent and teacher, to the parent at home, the teacher in school, to get right. Because if it isn't right for the learner, they're not going to be able to learn very well and make good progress. So what are the other things here? Well, up on the upper area of the brain there, you've got age-appropriate exploration and discovery. That's back to Bruner's Constructivism, isn't it? Exploration and discovery, guided reinvention, as it's sometimes called. So it's also involving, it's also near and close to the part of the brain which is looking at images, visual spatial formats. And so they sort of can work together. Now, habits of mind it's quite interesting, isn't it? So processing information and habits of mind are, well, of course, they're not necessarily that close, but they're also, yeah, so they are quite close in these two diagrams. And the habits of mind are quite are very important too. You know, good tips for studying. How do you, how do you solve a problem? What do you, when you faced with something that you you can't quite get to grips with, what do you do? So there's all sorts of ways in which you can go through a list of things you might do so that you can actually make some progress. These habits of mind. And also it's important as well that you concentrate on what you're doing, not that you're distracted by all sorts of other things as well. So
that's why people with ADHD have such a hard time.
Yes.
Because
yes.
It's very hard to stay focused on one thing when you have ADHD. It's just constantly thoughts coming and interfering with what you're supposed to be, you want to be thinking about.
Yes. The next thing, which is going round clockwise, which is attend to trade-off between plasticity and brain development, actually gave me a lot of, I had to think a lot about that before I really understood what this trade-off was all about. So as I understand it, I have a very simplistic understanding of the way this network in the brain, when you meet something new and you're trying to learn something new, how these signals in the brain are communicated, triggered by, it's a chemical reaction as well, triggered so that messages are sent from one part of the brain to the other. So this is building strong connections to cement that learning so it stays with you and to deepen the understanding. So that is brain development. But we talked about plasticity, and I gave the example of the child who had half her brain removed. So, but it happens to quite often when people, for example, have a stroke and they lose the power of speech or movement, but they can regain it. They can relearn, and so what actually happens is that this plasticity means sometimes that the damaged part of the brain, which isn't functioning, is replaced by another part of the brain, which has to then start to take over that, control that that functionality, to use a mathematical term. So it's now happening in a different part of the brain. Okay, but at the expense perhaps of pushing forward with brain development, that's where the trade-off comes. So what I talked about with that child, she didn't have normal brain development between the ages of 5 and 8. She had exceptional brain development, really, but it was all along that 3 years there was new parts of her brain taking over. So it was the plasticity. So and then she had some catching up to do with her peers, other children who hadn't had anything to hold them back. So that's very interesting. And then there's at the lower part there is help learners feel safe and purposeful. And that is so important, isn't it? And again,
absolutely critical. It's almost impossible. I don't know if it's impossible or not, but it is something that holds learners back if they don't feel safe, if they don't feel they can speak up. And that the fear of getting it wrong, I presume that is all about that section of the brain, that fear of getting it wrong, and therefore not engaging in the whole process at all, because they don't know, they don't want to get it wrong, so they won't engage.
Oh yes, but there's the opposite of that, Caroline. There's the don't put your hand up because it's not cool to be clever.
Well, there's the opposite of, well, there's that too. Oh my goodness. I was so blessed to go to a school where it was cool to be clever. So it was.
Well, I didn't. I had a wonderful time until I was 13, and then I moved to London. And for the next 3 years, I had a horrible time at school because I didn't understand that it wasn't cool to be clever, you know? And I put my hand up, but you don't do that if you want to be popular. not in my day in the London school I went to,
which is where the interactive the method of interactive teaching that AIMSEC teaches is so good, because no one's putting their hand up and everybody pretty much has to interact, or else they're the odd one out if they don't interact. So
yes, this is asking questions where everybody's got to answer. So if it's a question which has two possible answers, yes and no, it's thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. Okay,
and they will go, that's stupid, but they'll still put their thumb up or down. They'll still express.
But actually, children, it's amazing how even big teenagers actually love it.
I'm talking about the big ones, yeah. I mean, the younger ones will engage.
And then the question which has 4 possible answers, and you give them some time to work out which is the wrong, and then you say 1 finger for answer number 1, 2 fingers for answer number 2, 3 fingers for answer number 3, and 4 fingers for answer number 4. And that makes, but you tell them, don't put your hand up until I tell you. You give them some time to think and say, and then you give a countdown, as you would for starting a race or something. Everybody must put their hand up. And of course,
you use the same gamification element of rock, paper, scissors, as rock, paper, scissors, go, or something along those lines, so that everyone has a rhythm and knows exactly when to indicate their answer.
Yes. Now, the last one is perhaps the most important of all, so I left it to last, because lifelong learning, I really believe in lifelong learning for everyone. You've got to make life full and interesting. It's what I wake up for every morning. I might learn something new today. I probably will. This is it's written there, support learners to monitor their own learning. And I'm interpreting it as in school to guide and have a learning environment which actually helps learners to develop independent learning. Now, when I say it helps them to develop it, they come to school with it. After all, children, babies, as we said, they walk and talk without, they have that independence when they're even, 12 months old, but or less, but somehow they can lose that, and don't let them lose it. Okay. So I am looking at the clock now.
Yes, that's it for the week.
I think we should say goodbye because it's 6 o'clock.
So goodbye. See you next time. Thank you for joining us.
And we hope you'll come back. Oh, Caroline, before we say goodbye, shall we continue with teaching and learning next week?
I would love to continue with teaching and learning. That would be a great birthday present for me.
Oh yes, it's Caroline's birthday next Monday, so we even thought of putting on a recording so she could go to a party or something, but you said no, you'd have a live Happy Massage, didn't you, Caroline?
Yes.
I tell you what, you
birthday present.
Yes, you could give her a birthday present by actually by putting something on the chat line, or well, is there a chat line here?
Yes, we don't have anybody watching right this second. We've had people on, but not right this second. So,
but next week, by actually telling us if you've used any of these ideas, or if they're meaningful to you, or if you're somebody who was frightened of maths, and you're going to be, well, if you're somebody who's got children and you yourself thought you were no good at maths, you're going to make sure you don't let your children know that, all those things. Anything you want to tell us about, if you're a teacher who tried out any of these ideas, let us know. Put them on the chat line or on comments, because you'll see on the AIMSEC Facebook page this the next week
comment underneath,
will be posted probably on Saturday, and you can add comments there. So that'd be a lovely birthday present for Caroline. Okay, so it's time to say goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.